Hello, this is Reindeer's Bees, and today we're going to talk about 5 different mite treatments, how to use them, when to use them, everything I know about them. So I'm just talking about the 5 commercially available ones. I'm missing 1 or 2, but those are the ones that I haven't watched any videos on or haven't had any personal experience with. So today I'm going to talk about oxalic acid, Apivar, Apigard, Hopguard, and what was the 5th one? And Formic Pro. Of course, I forget the one that I use the most. So I'm gonna start with Formic Pro because that's what I'm the most familiar with. I've used it every year since I started in 2018, so I have a pretty good amount of experience with it. So Formic Pro, there's 2 treatment plans. So you can use 2 strips for 14 days, 2 strips for 14 days or 2 strips for 10 days. So for the 2 strips for 14 days, you just put them on, space them out in the brood box. I'll put a picture on the screen of like what it should look like. But you put them on, at one time, and then you come back 2 weeks later and you pull them off and you do your second test to make sure that they've killed all the mites. From my experience, they do really well and kill a lot of mites. I've had hives that have tested as high as 18 mites. It was a lot. But I came back 3 weeks later and they only had, I think, 3 or 4 in a wash, so it killed 3% or 4% of mites. So that's really a big difference, and that hive even survived the winter, so pretty big deal. Anyway, so with the Formic Pro, you can do 2 strips for 14 days, or you can do 1 strip, wait 10 days, and then put on a new strip and take off the old one. So the 2 strips for 14 days method, that gets under the caps, and so you kill all of the mites that are in with the under the cap brood, in with the developing pupae. So I think it does get a higher kill than if you use 1 strip than 1 strip. Both are valid treatments and are both in the little directions booklet for the Formic Pro. So whatever it says in there, listen to it, do whatever it says. You have to make sure the entrance is completely open, because otherwise the formic acid just overwhelms the bees and it's really dangerous and can kill an entire hive pretty quickly. So if there's one thing you remember about formic acid, is you absolutely have to open the entrance when you're treating. So make sure that you open the entrance completely up. What I found is a good way, if it's during robbing season, late July or August, is I can put a screen that doesn't doesn't directly block their entrance. It gives there's some space between where the bees come out and the screen, and this just decreases their entrance whilst not interrupting their fanning. And so I haven't lost any queens or any bees using that. So that's worked really well for me. Do not block the entrance though. That's really, really important. You can treat with honey supers on. It works great when there's a lot of brood. The 2 strip method kills more mites than the 1 strip method, because the 1 strip method only kills mites in ideal conditions. So most of the time it doesn't kill only kills mites under the cappings in ideal conditions. So I think that's everything with Formic Pro. I almost forgot one of the most important parts about treating with formic acid. So formic acid does have temperature concerns. So you want to make sure that when you put on the treatment, that day and the next 2 days, so first 3 days of treatment, the temperatures are below 85 degrees. If they're above 85 degrees, you're going to lose a lot of brood and potentially maybe the hive even. So you have to be aware of that. And if it's below 85 for those first 3 days, you don't see very many negative effects. If it gets over 85 on the 4th, 5th, 6th day, it seems to be okay. You might lose a little bit more brood, but it's not a huge amount. And it's definitely worth it to kill a lot of mites if you have them. So one thing that really can help the bees deal with formic is if you put like an empty honey super on top and just give them more space to deal with the vapor. Most of the vapor comes out in those first 3 days, and so especially it'd be good to have that super on in the first 3 days. One last thing about Formic Pro is people say it kills queens. So Formic Pro can kill queens, but I personally have only ever lost like maybe 2 or 3, and I've done over 20 treatments. So it's not a high percentage. It's a very small amount of those queens. And most of the time I use 2 strips. And so there was an interview with Bruce and Tom Nolan, a Formic Pro salesman, and he explains everything about Formic Pro and what it does. And I will link that above, right up here. Great interview, tells you everything you need to know about Formic Pro. So I suggest you go watch that if you're going to use Formic Pro this season. So Apivar. So this was the most commonly used treatment in the United States up till a few years ago. So a couple of years ago, a lot of the commercial producers that have been using it noticed that it did not kill nearly as many mites. The efficacy had gone down by a lot. So I think I'm not exactly sure, don't quote me on this, but I think it was like, now it's getting closer to 60 or 70% kill, rather than before when it was getting, 80+% kill on the mites. So, that's something to consider if you're still using Apivar. I think it's also highly regional, so some regions where it's not used, the Varroa mites have a lot less resistance to it, so that's something to think about. Its active ingredient is amitraz. It's a synthetic chemical made in a lab, I think to deal with other mites, and then they repurposed it to use for Varroa mites, and it was very effective. And it's very easy on the bees. You put 2 strips in per 5 frames of bees, and the strips, go only in the brood boxes. You're not allowed to put them on with supers, and the strips go in for 6 to 7 weeks, and that's when you pull them out. So it's a pretty simple treatment, pretty easy. May not be as effective as it used to be in other areas, but as long as you're testing after the treatment, you'll know whether you need to do another treatment or not. So it shouldn't be a huge deal. So that's another option. The other advantage to Apivar is it's very easy on the bees and it has very little negative effect. It also is not temperature sensitive like the formic acid. So you can put it on at any temperatures, even if it's getting very hot, and it's still effective. I don't know what the word for it is, but it kills the mites via the bees just touching it like over the 6 or 7 week span. That's how it's effective. It's not killing them with vapors like the formic acid is. So another treatment is Apigard. So in a lot of ways, Apigard has taken Apivar's place as the commercial mite treatment. It's very commonly used, I think. From what I've seen on YouTube, I don't know what people do, commercial beekeepers who aren't on YouTube, whether they use it or not. A lot of them on YouTube do use Apigard, as well as hobbyists. So Apigard it uses thymol. I think it's the essential extract from thyme. And it's a gel, it comes in a gel, and you set the gel in a container on top of the frames, and you have to make sure you have a shim on. And that allows the bees access to the gel, and they pull the gel out of their hives, and it just kills the mites on contact. So that's how the Apigard kills mites. And I have some little experience with it, so I made sure to do my research on this. If the temperatures are above 80 degrees, then you need to use a lower dose of 25 grams 3 to 4 times, 2 weeks apart. So it can take a long time if you have really hot conditions, but if it's really hot, then you probably have a longer season and have more time anyways. If it's not too hot, and the highs are below the 80s, then you can use a 50 gram dose per 10 frames of bees and apply 2 weeks in between treatments. So in that case, it would only take 4 weeks or a month. And yeah, you absolutely need to have a shim. That's really, really important, because what happens if you don't have a shim is it's just sitting on the top and the bees aren't able to access it, so it just dries out and you don't really kill many mites. So you gotta have a super because they need to be able to access it. And it does have temperature regulations, but you can still treat if it's getting in the 90s with a lower dose, which a lot of beekeepers do use that. And I think it gets close to 80% kills, so I think that's pretty good. So oxalic acid, it's a very common treatment in the US, mostly when the hives don't have any brood. It's a natural acid. It's found in honey and many other natural things. Formic acid is actually found in nettles, like when they sting you, that's formic acid. I thought that was interesting. Oxalic acid is very frequently used in the US, mostly when the hives don't have any brood, because when the hives do have a lot of brood, you have to use many rounds of oxalic acid to kill all the mites. So oxalic acid was approved in 2015, so it's a pretty new treatment. And I was listening to a live stream with Cameron Jack and Cameron Reynolds. I'll link it up here. It's like 2 or 2.5 hours, but so much good information, only even if you watch some of the parts of it. Cameron Jack talks about how the current dose of oxalic acid vapor, which is the most commonly way that it's administered, is not high enough. And we know this, but the EPA is not willing to change it. So the best way to combat this is to use the oxalic acid dribble method, which is mixing oxalic acid into sugar syrup and then dribbling it on the bees. And as they eat it, and they move it around the hive, I believe. And so the amount of oxalic acid in the sugar syrup is a lot higher dose compared to the 1 gram per box for the vaporization. So it's a higher dose of oxalic acid, per bee when you use the dribble rather than the vapor, which is only 1 gram per deep box. So oxalic acid, most beekeepers use it when the hives don't have any brood, and they do 2 rounds, and that should kill nearly all your mites. I'm not entirely sure because you can't really get in an alcohol wash and test bees when it's in the middle of the winter, so I'm not sure. I don't know exactly how many mites it kills, but I think it kills a very high percent. So you can knock your mite levels down to almost 0 going into the spring, which is highly advantageous for many reasons. Whatever you want to do with your bees, they're going to be a lot healthier if they don't have any mites. Whether you want to split them or make honey or whatever it is, they're going to be a lot more healthy if they have less mites. And then if you are doing it when the hives have brood, Cayman Reynolds has done a lot of videos. I'll link one of them up there. He talks about doing 5 to 6 rounds in a 21-day period. Duck River Honey likes to do his 6 rounds in 24 days because the drones hatch in 24 days. So his reasoning is that he's even killing all the mites from the drones. So those 5 to 6 rounds, I've heard a lot of different numbers, but I think it kills between like 60 and 80% of the mites, and can do some serious damage, but it's really dependent on a lot of different factors. So you want to make sure that you're testing after to make sure it's worked. So HopGuard 2, I have pretty little experience, but I watched some videos from the Honeybee Health Coalition and the Beekeeping with a Bee Whisperer. I'll link the Honeybee Health Coalition video up here. It's a treatment that's similar to oxalic acid in a lot of ways because it's a natural acid that happens in nature. It's from hops, I believe, and it's most effective when the hives are broodless, but can be used when the hives are not broodless and during the summer and fall when they have some brood still. It's just not nearly as effective. So I think it's more of what you'd call a maintenance treatment, meaning it's not like a knockdown treatment. It doesn't kill, like if you have a really high mite count, let's say if you have 18 mites, it's not going to knock that down to 2 or 3 mites per 300 bees. It's going to keep that, roughly 15 mites probably. So you apply 2 strips per 5 frames, and you put them on for 30 days and take them off. Most of the time the bees will have chewed them out, but if they haven't, then you can just pull it out after the 30 days. And I don't think that many beekeepers use this treatment, but it'd be interesting. I don't know, I'd kind of be interested to try it during like the fall if I can get it in November or something when the bees are about to finish brooding. That could be a very useful tool like oxalic acid to clean up the mites for the year. So I'm definitely considering that. You can use it with Superzon, as with oxalic acid. Oxalic acid you can now treat with Superzon as well. But the most important advice I can give you is definitely make sure you're testing before you treat and after you treat, because if you don't treat after, or if you don't test after you treat, you just have no idea if it worked or not. And so what was the point? You can lose a lot of colonies if you don't know where their mite counts are after the treatments. Most of the time they work, but you got to know for sure, and your bees could suffer otherwise. So I hope that I hope this helps everyone make their mite plan for 2023 and kill those mites. As in a title from Cayman Reynolds' video, nuke them from orbit. They need to die, and we're gonna kill them. Comment down below, like and subscribe, hit that bell to be notified when I upload. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Reindeers Bees, and I'll see you in the next one.